Ladies and gentlemen, we will be beginning very soon our conference. Let me welcome very cordially at the conference call for investors and analysts devoted to the TAURON Group's financial results Q3 after 9 months of the first 9 months of 2019. The earnings will be presented by the CEO, Mr. Filip Grzegorczyk, and Mr. Marek Wadowski, the CFO. And my name is Marcin Lau. I'm working for the Investor Relations team. As usual, our conference is being broadcast over the internet and available in the English language version. In the second part of our conference, we will have our experts available for you, and I will then introduce them then. So, Mr. President, please start the presentation. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. We have a pleasure to present to you the financial results and operating results achieved by TAURON Group in the first 3 quarters of this year and in Q3 alone this year. Let me start by giving you an overview of the financial position of the group, highlights, and the work progress of the most important key investment projects. Traditionally, Mr. Wadowski, the CFO, will describe the macroeconomic and market situation and will present the details of the financial results split into individual segments. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of the key Q1, Q3 2019 data, one should emphasize that over the first 9 months of this year, TAURON Group achieved solid financial results, and which is also very important, it maintained its stable financial position. In terms of data presented on the slide, one should point out that from the beginning of January till the end of September 2019, the sales revenue went up 15% year-over-year, reaching more than 15 billion PLN. It was primarily driven by higher electricity sales revenue achieved thanks to the higher electricity sales prices on the wholesale market and the retail market. The group generated a EBITDA more than 3 billion PLN and the net profit of 850 million plus PLN, so flat versus last year. Over the first 3 quarters of this year, the capital expenditures reached more than 2.7 billion PLN, with 12% higher year-over-year. The change was due to the implementation of investment projects in the distribution and mining and generation segments. Net debt to EBITDA ratio, calculated excluding the subordinated bonds debt at the end of September 2019, reached 2.83. The details on the debt and financing will be presented in a moment by the CFO, Mr. Wadowski. Moving on to the operating data, one should point out that TAURON Group posted stable electricity distribution volume. It was achieved thanks to the increase of electricity consumption by small and medium-sized enterprises and households, which compensated the decline of demand for electricity among small and large enterprises. In the reported period, TAURON produced more than 10 terawatt-hours of electricity. One should point out that the share of production from renewable energy sources went up year-over-year by almost 4 percentage points. It was possible thanks to the more than 40% increase of generation from the zero and low emission sources. Next slide, please. We have financial and operating data for Q3 this year. The trends visible in this year were very similar to the ones observed over the entire 9-month period of this year. Next slide presents several key, most important events, the highlights. Some of them we already had a chance and pleasure to present earlier during our previous earnings conference call. So today, let me just remind you that in September we carried out a major step, the first major step towards the so-called green turn of TAURON. We closed the transaction acquisition of 5 wind farms with a total capacity of 180 megawatts. Thanks to this deal, we doubled the capacity in wind-based capacity of TAURON. I have a pleasure to inform you also here that in the competition organized by the Accounting and Tax Institute, TAURON for the third time received the Best of the Best award, the special award for the Best Integrated Report, also for the third time, and an honorable mention granted for the first time for the best statement on compliance with corporate governance rules in the best annual report competition. Let me hand over now the floor to Mr. Składowski, the CFO. Ladies and gentlemen, the macroeconomic situation in the period under review indicates clearly there is a slowdown of the economic growth rate. The data indicates less demand and slower growth among the enterprises. The electricity consumption went down by 0.7%. The electricity generation dropped almost 3 percentage points. However, definitely there was an increase of electricity imports, which of course had an impact upon the operation of our power generating units. The key financial data for the first 9 months of this year indicate, as the CEO mentioned, sales revenue going up, the net profit flat, comparable to 2018. EBITDA adjusted by deducting one-off events shows 1.3% increase. In Q3 alone, also we can see revenue going up, the net profit is a bit lower, EBITDA is flat, comparable, indicates a decline 0.4%. The results of individual segments show that the most important subsidiary of TAURON Group is distribution segment, which generates the majority of the EBITDA, of the group's EBITDA. Also significant segments are the supply and generation segments. In Q3 alone, the EBITDA structure, even to a larger extent, indicates the importance of the EBITDA generated by the distribution segment. The main reasons for a change of EBITDA over the first 9 months of this year is, first of all, a decline of the mining segment's earnings and an increase in the distribution segment earnings. In Q3 alone, also, a decline in the mining line of business had an impact upon the EBITDA. The improvement of the earnings in the generation distribution segments had a good impact upon the EBITDA. Let's start with individual segments. Let's start with the distribution segment, which, as I mentioned, is our biggest segment, generating the biggest part of our EBITDA. The main reason for the increase is the increase of the distribution rates, which is, first of all, the consequence of a larger return on capital, higher return on capital. Let me remind you that in the distribution segment, the distribution tariff was approved from the beginning of Q2. So throughout the first quarter, the distribution tariffs rates were at the level of 2018. Had it not been so, the impact of those rates on the segment's earnings would have been even greater. In the distribution segment, as we showed in the beginning, we are observing over the first 9 months of this year stable volume with a slight downward trend, but in Q3 alone you can see this volume drop a bit more clearly. We can see that starting from the beginning of the year. There's been a decline of volume of electricity distributed, with the beginning of the year looking still pretty good. As the time progressed, this decline has become steeper. This decline is first of all taking place in the large enterprises segment and in the medium enterprises segment. So one may say that this is mainly applicable to the companies, enterprises that are consuming large electricity volumes. In the household segment, we can see still the volume is still growing. The volume of electricity distributed is still growing in this segment. In Q3 alone, the situation in terms of the distribution looks similar. With respect to the key parameters of the distribution segment, previously during the earnings conference call, I was indicating that those parameters had not been yet officially by the Energy Regulatory Office approved. Now I can say that these are parameters that are officially in force. In effect, we don't have yet the accounts settled for the 2019, so we are not able to indicate unequivocally whether these parameters, in terms of the quality parameters, will have a major impact upon the tariff or not. However, we can already say today that if nothing extraordinary happens by the end of the year, no unexpected large-scale events occur, then these parameters will be maintained, will be met by the distribution segment. It's also worth noting that the regulatory asset base is growing systematically in the 2019 versus 2018 is several hundred million PLN. This is also important for us due to the growth. Because of that reason, the growth and increase of return on capital. In the generation segment, two important elements should be pointed out. The first one being higher margin in the renewable energy sources segment. This higher margin is first of all a consequence of better wind conditions during that period. Also, at the beginning of the year, the production of electricity from hydro electricity generation was looking very good. Now the hydrological situation is definitely worse. However, in the results, in the earnings for the first 9 months of this year, we didn't take into account, except for a small minor element, we didn't take into account the impact of the acquisition of a wind farm. We purchased them in September. The impact of those wind farms is only a few million PLN. It's insignificant now, but it will be much more significant in Q4 and next year. We are estimating that the purchase of those wind farms will lead to an improvement of EBITDA by more than 1 million PLN per annum. In terms of margin on electricity, in conventional sources, you can see an increase of EBITDA, despite the fact that we are observing a decline of electricity generation. This is due to the fact that our units were contracted electricity sales in 2018 still at high prices, and we are implementing that. However, on the spot market, on the market that now we use for the current production, on this market, those prices do not cover to a large extent the cost of producing electricity. Therefore, the decline of electricity production in the period under review. In Q3 alone, the situation looks similar, despite the fact that this decline of electricity production is greater than over the first 9-month period. Here, EBITDA is higher. In the supply segment, the main component, the main driver that you need to take into account when you analyze this segment is the impact of the Electricity Act, the Act on Electricity. The situation is such that in December 2018, the Act on Electricity came into effect, and based under this Act, we adjusted, revised our own tariffs to the 2018 level. The impact of this adjustment is in the first graph, electricity price and volume. This, however, graph includes not only the impact of the adjustment, the tariffs, but also it includes the adjustment related to the market. Today, we are dealing with a situation, such a situation that the electricity price is higher than in 2018. However, the price is not higher due to the higher demand, but the price is due to the increase of the costs, CO2 especially. With such cost-driven price increase, it's difficult to put it back to back or pass on the full increase of cost onto consumers. It leads simply to the margin contraction. Of course, we are showing it in the first graph. Of course, it's related to the decline in the volume due to the fact that there are also customers who are not accepting higher prices, and we are not buying. So the sales volumes are also slightly lower. They're not much lower, but slightly lower. In the first graph, we are showing the total impact of the price and the volume, mainly due to the declining margins. That also includes the reduction of the tariffs and prices down to the 2018 levels. After the amendment to the law of June 2019, we adjusted the price revised the price for the customers that we invoiced electricity at higher prices in 2019 to the 2018 levels. And this is included in the second graph, revenue decreasing adjustments. In the second graph, you can see the adjustments from the first half of the year, because that's when we made those adjustments, and also adjustments related to the second half of the year for the customers who made a statement or made a representation that they wanted a lower price, so the 2018 price. In Q4, practically we will not be anymore making any adjustments. There could be some slight minor adjustment, but we will not be making such adjustments, because to the customers who submitted their statements, for whom we adjusted the prices, we will not be adjusting them anymore. We'll be invoicing them at lower prices, so we'll be showing it as price and volume. At the same time, we received the price difference amount. We obtained the price difference amounts, so the price difference amount and the financial compensation is in the third graph. Today we received the price difference amount for the first half of the year, 637 million PLN. In the graph where we are showing the price difference and the compensation, we also booking the potential compensation for Q3. We haven't received this compensation yet. However, we know the parameters that will be used to calculate this compensation amount, and this is also included in this area. In the first 9 months of 2019, we have used up the provision of December 2018. At the end of December, we set up a 214 million PLN provision, mainly related to the G tariffs, but not only, but more than 90% of this provision goes to G tariff, and this provision was related to the loss. It was not related to the lost margin, but to the loss, because we can set up a provision related to for the margin loss. In the fourth graph, we are showing the update and the consumption of the provision for onerous contracts. We haven't used up the entire provision here. We still have several dozen million PLN to be used up in Q4. However, as of the end of June, as we mentioned, we set up another provision related to the statements coming from the customers for the amount of 68 million PLN, and we also partially used up this provision in Q3. I know it looks a bit complicated, but summing it all up, the impact of Act on Electricity is neutral for us. It's neutral as long as we take into account the margin decline due to the situation on the market in the total amount of about 200 million PLN. In 2018, when we were preparing the budget for 2019, we made an assumption that the margin will decline because of market situation. At that time, it was, we know the provisions of Act on Electricity, the margin decline in the region of 200 million PLN, and we still expect this to come true for the entire 2019. The Act cannot compensate for us the margin decline, the margin contraction, and this is what's the ultimate, we see the ultimate impact upon the earnings, due to the fact that in 2018 we set up a provision that will be successively dissolving in 2019. When in arithmetic numbers, the decline of the margin will be compensated by the dissolving of its provision, but this is a totally different thing. The point is that we should be all aware of the fact that the total impact of the electricity is neutral. However, the market impact is minus 200 million PLN for the entire 2019. That would have occurred had it not been for the Act on Electricity, and if it had not been for the provision that somehow shows a bit a different image of sales, but the market has this type of impact upon our supply segment. Q3 alone looks similar. I will not be getting into the details of Q3, but here also we are clearly accounting for both the compensation and the provision dating back to 2018. And let's move on to the mining segment. Here it's worth emphasizing two important factors. The first important factor is such that, of course, the mining segment is the earnings of the mining segment are, first of all, under the production pressure. There's no doubt about it. Of course, partly the costs were also reduced because there was lower extraction, but the main driver of such earnings in 2019 of the mining segment in the period under review is definitely the volume of hard coal extracted. The second important factor is the fact, what are the reasons for such volume? The reasons for such volume is, first of all, the fact that in the past period, certain capital investments projects were not made that would allow for increasing the volume, extraction volume. We can see clearly today that all the pro-efficiency actions that we take, they improve the situation. Had it not been for those steps, the earnings would have even been worse, but they are not of a breakthrough caliber. We are lacking, we are missing the effect of investment projects and CapEx. This is what we've been reporting, the 800-meter level at Janina, the Grzegorz shaft at Sobieski, and the Brzeszcze coal mine investment plan. Without the effects, the outcome of those CapEx investment projects, we are not able to show any improvements in the earnings. But definitely Q3 was very difficult for this segment due to much lower extraction volume than last year. And now Q4 looks a bit better. However, it's of course the effect of our organic tech actions, our basic efforts aimed at improving efficiency, but this no breakthrough will be visible in that period. Ladies and gentlemen, a few words about the debts and financing. The net debt to EBITDA ratio of 2.83. This is the leverage ratio that we report to the banks. It's at a safe level. It went up, but it went up because all the time we are conducting and we are entering the final phase of investments in the 910 megawatt unit in Jaworzno. However, our funds available at the end of September is 3,800,000,000 PLN. Beginning of November, we paid back the market bond issue. As we announced, we would not be refinancing that. We did not refinance it, roll it over. The program was repaid, so we don't have now such a dilemma what to do in a situation where our potential or our bondholders would be interested in convening a bondholders meeting and talk to us about the leverage ratio. Let me remind you that in the bonds program, the Polish bonds program ratio was 3.0. The definition of this ratio was a bit different due to the change of the definition of this ratio. There was no threat that anything bad could happen to this program. As of today, the program has been repaid, and our available financing today is about 3 billion PLN after the repayment of that program. And now, let me hand over the floor again to the CEO. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now show the work progress on the key investment projects. The first, let's call it the flagship project, is the construction of a 910 megawatt unit in Jaworzno, and the work progress on this project at the end of September was 96%. Here it's worth mentioning that as part of negotiations with a general contractor with respect to extending the scope of works under this project, we came to an agreement that would have a positive impact upon the environmental parameters of the unit, especially in particular the mercury emissions will be reduced. Another important undertaking is the construction of a CCGT unit in Stalowa Wola. The works on this site are conducted by the contractor selected in the first quarter of this year, the steam piping is being completed and the auxiliary installation are being completed. It's the final stage. Also, the works are continued on the main process flows and the civil works and the finishing works. The pressure tests of new cooling water conduit were conducted. The blowdown of the boiler is foreseen for Q4. The work progress 86% end of Q3. Also, the upgrade of Łagisza power plant is moving in line with the plan, which is the addition of the implementation of a heating unit and the construction of the picking and backup boilers. The work progress on this project is 65%. In terms of capex broken down into segments, first of all, one need to point out that the capex of Tauron Group over the first 9 months of 2019 came in at 2.7 billion PLN. Traditionally, the largest capex was spent on the upgrading the grid assets and connecting new customers to the distribution grid. The capex allocated in the distribution segment reached more than 1.3 billion PLN. The generation segment's capex reached 972 million PLN, including more than 500 million spent on the construction of the Jaworzno power generating unit. In the mining segment, the capex reached almost 370 million PLN, and they were related to the construction of a Grzegorz shaft at Sobieski coal mine, the Brzeszcze coal mine capex program, and the construction of a 800-meter level at Janina coal mine. This is where we'd like to end the presentation of our earnings, and let's open the floor for the discussion and questions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. Let's move on to the Q&A session. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Piotr Dzieciowski, Citibank. Let me start with a question about the mining segment. Am I correct in my understanding that, if you could help me answer, what will be the effective cash flow for this business, for this line of business, in a simplified terms at the end of this year? If I add it all up, is it possible that 700 million you will spend out of Tauron's cash register into the segment? And if you could help me understand how the segment will change after the 2 shafts are completed. Will it change anything? Is it possible that the segment will ever be above water in terms of its cash flow generated, cash flow positive? Will it ever be? Well, let me answer in the following way, because this number, 700 million PLN, definitely is possible, because we have capex, we have EBITDA, so definitely this is the way it may come out in 2019. This is a difficult year for the mining segment. I hope it's the last difficult year for the segment, in such a sense that the efficiency of the segment will be higher already in 2020. But after we have completed those investment projects in such a long-term plan, we are getting a positive cash flow there. We are seeing it later, but here one needs to answer the question, when will this materialize? Of course, we are showing there in our plan when those capex projects will be completed, and at that time, that's true, after those capex projects have been completed, this segment stands a chance of generating positive cash flow. However, here there's one more comment needs to be made here, one more caveat, because it will be positive on an ongoing basis. So we'll have capex, we'll have EBITDA generated. However, in terms of the repayment of the debt that we can see now in the mining segment, but also a period of this negative cash flow, here we are analyzing all the time what instruments we should be using for this segment, because taking into account the financial cost, it may turn out that this segment is not able to repay the principal amount. So we'll have to look at those instruments, how to take advantage well. The debt, I'm not that much worried about it, because due to the consolidated statements, you will recapitalize those subsidiaries. If you could help me jump from -700 to the 0 you're talking about, how much volume will be added by the 2 shafts, and How much is it versus today's volume? We know that a ton of this, such coal is roughly 200 PLN. Can we get a good understanding? Will it get 3 million, 4 million tons more of extraction output? Because this is what's required for the segment to break even. Well, to get a good understanding, one of such actions that we are conducting in order to make this mining segment to improve its profitability, the change of structure of coal produced, to a larger extent targeting the large large lump coal. It is possible, but it requires some activities underground to make this coal not to be too much dust to many small lumps during the processing. It should help us also raise the price. However, we are assuming that in order for that segment, if we talk about the consolidated, it's irrelevant whether we're talking about debt or recapitalization. For the segment to be cash flow positive, its extraction should be at least above, as the absolute minimum is 7 million tons. This is probably not achievable as of today, but the 7 million ton level extraction output would have to be reached, because without that we will not be able. And right away, just to make it clear, the cash flow, it is not in such a case a cash flow that is very high, but it's definitely positive. But the two new shafts, what is the throughput? Will add another coal phase? Because the segment, if I can remember, I've been dealing with Tauron for 10 years now, but has never achieved 7 million tons. Probably one historic year was almost 6 million tons. Will these shafts replace today's shafts, or will shift coal phases from the current levels to the lower levels? Will launch a new coal phase? Can you give us any hope that this volume will go up? Well, let me put it this way. Historically, we didn't have free coal mines, so the Brzeszcze coal mine output should also help, should also contribute. But these two investment projects mean, as a matter of fact, providing access not so much to a new deposit, because in case of Janina coal mine, it's moving down to a lower level because we have more deposit to mine, because we're getting to a new lower level and we have more space. The production process is much better, whereas the Grzegorz shaft is providing access to a new deposit. Today, just speaking briefly, we are conducting this mining that's kind of like remnants. Those coal faces are very short, the retoolings are very frequent refurnishings, because in CRIF3 we had a lot of those retoolings. And this is due to the geological nature of our coal deposit that we are exploiting. Grzegorz shaft, definitely different conditions. This will enable us to access different mining areas. So it will definitely enable much more comfortable, more predictable running of this process. Continuing mining, if we went above the ground. What's happening in Poland? Inventory is going up, prices abroad are dropping. Where are we? Where's the market today? Coal market today. Will the prices continue dropping? Will they be stable next year? There's more imports. So where is these imports coming from? What's the situation? Well, the situation is as follows. Today, of course, we are dealing with very high inventory levels, probably around 1/4. So the power sector could just consume it throughout the first entire quarter if there was no mining at all. So of course inventory levels are very high. But however, at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, there was no coal in Poland. Therefore, everyone was looking for that coal wherever they could find it. Of course, high imports came in. Those imports until today has been continued. This is the truth that as far as the import directions, the price of coal dropped. Of course, the transportation plays a major role. And the situation is as follows. We expect the following, that in 2020 the coal prices, due to the long-term contracts that are in effect between, first of all, PGG and the power sector, power utilities, the price could be stable, could be flat. It could go even up a bit, but practically flat, stable, with a slight upward trend. This is due to the nature of those contracts. If someone Well, where did these contracts come from? They happened when there was a shortage of coal. Everyone wanted to secure, to hedge themselves for the longest possible period to ensure that the inventory levels required by law could be secured. This is the reason for this contract. So expect that the prices in Poland, because of that reason, might be at such levels. The import prices, it's difficult for me to say, but it seems that they will not be much lower because this is the matter of the profitability of imported coal producers as well. So I wouldn't expect that due to the high inventory levels we'll see any special coal price declines. The high inventory levels may lead to the reduction of production in Poland, lack of the dilution of fixed prices, and the repeat of the crisis of 2014-2013. Because we have this following situation: the production of electricity in Poland is not dropping. We have renewables going up and the imports going up, and the coal is being squeezed again. We have production. We are trying to improve, to raise. You're also saying that 2 or 3 million tons you will produce more, so we don't have anywhere to burn this coal. Can you imagine a situation like that? But again, we'll face a crisis similar as in 2014-15 timeframe, and the earnings of the mining sector will be under increasing pressure due to the declining volume, due to the lack of a possibility to burn this coal quantity. It's difficult for me to say whether such a situation may occur, but definitely looking at the coal mining segment, the mining segment, that's true. The power sector, the utilities are consuming less coal, also have imports going up. If you look 2019, 2018, the first 9 months of both years, the increase of tariffs is almost 57%. I'm talking about the volume of electricity imports. This imports push out the most expensive units from the system, the least efficient ones, the ones that are consuming the largest quantity of coal, as a matter of fact. And that's true, the situation is not easy. I don't know whether it's a 15 time frame crisis downturn may repeat itself, but definitely the output, the extraction will be under the market pressure. I'm talking about the entire extraction, mining, not only the thermal coal, but also coke. I know we're talking about the Tauron Capital Group's earnings, but we can see very clearly that our contractors, for instance, Mittal, is switching off, shutting down its big blast furnace, the large furnace in Krakow. We can see that the market for the coke is not good also. So it's going to be a difficult year. So it's difficult to say that you can see on the market any signals as of today that might indicate that the situation might improve. We can expect a difficult year. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please, any more questions? If you allow me, we have a few questions coming from over the internet. So there's a question about the Łagisza project. Has it been submitted for the main auction of the capacity market for 2024? Well, if you could have Mr. Gola, Director Gola, answer this question, please. Ladies and gentlemen, as last year, also this year, we reviewed all our assets to take part in the forthcoming auctions for 2024. Also works were underway related to analyzing the possibilities of having this unit participate in the capacity market, but we also tied it to the potential capex process. So therefore, in the main auction this year, this unit is not being taken into account. Thank you. The next question is applicable to related to the stage related to the divestment of the Janina coal mine. At what stage of this process we are currently at? At the moment, we are at the stage, one may say, of analyzing by the potential bidders of the situation of Janina coal mine. We are expecting but in the near future we'll be able to receive potential bids, and at that point in time, we'll be communicating information that we have out of the process. As of today, we have no information available because the process is underway. Another question from the internet, if you allow me. Should one expect impairment charges in Q4 2019? It's too early to give you an answer to this question, because the analysis, of course, we will conduct at the end of the year. We'll be conducting this analysis based on our pricing assumptions related to the future. It's middle of November now, so we're not able to say yet whether such impairment charges will occur. Of course, they can always occur at the end of the reporting period if it turns out that the situation changes versus the situation at the end of June. Thank you very much. Mr. Dzięciołowski, please, again.
Skoro koledzy nie chcą zadać pytań, to ja mam cały szereg jeszcze. Chciałem się zapytać, czy
Since my colleagues don't want to ask questions, I have a number of questions. I'd like to ask whether can you imagine a situation where the price for Janina will be negative, that you will pay someone to take away this asset, so the valuation of this asset will assume shutdown of this, closing down of this coal mine, and someone will be paid for this shutdown. Such transactions do take place in Western Europe, for instance. Is it possible that the price will be negative? It's hard for me to answer this question. Let me answer the following way, that any price, whatever price occurs, we will review the profitability of this transaction for the group. Of course, we'll take the appropriate decisions. It's difficult for me to say what the price will be. However, that's true, such deals did occur, and if it turns out that the bidder will guarantee or assure the growth of this coal mine, that all options are possible. Let me ask about the distribution. Two things I find interesting, I'm interested in. To what extent the regulator, how the regulator views the passing on the costs, for instance, the labor costs that started to grow fast lately. Do you take this into account in your tariff? How often do you adjust that? And the second factor, for several years, the volumes are going up in Poland, and you're winning this game against the regulator. Always the volumes were higher than the ones assumed in the tariff, so you had higher revenue, so you had extra earnings, extra income. Can the situation reverse? There will be a negative volume effect in the subsequent quarters? Let me start with the first question. Let me explain such a mechanism, because in the distribution we have a cost model, we call it, that's in force for 5 years. Our cost model is in force, not only ours, but is in force until the end of 2020. So, what is the cost model? The cost model, briefly speaking, is simply a summary of costs, taking into account over the 5-year period the efficiency improvement ratios or indicators. And now, if in some area, for instance, in the labor cost area, costs are going up above the level that's embedded in the cost model, then that's our loss. It's our loss on the tariff, so it has a direct impact upon EBITDA. We don't have the situation in 2019. However, a lot will also depend on what will be the regulator's approach to the subsequent period. I'm talking about 2021, 25, another 5-year period. Again, we will know then whether the regulator is taking into account a change of certain costs or does not take this into account. As of today, as I said, the comparison of our cost, actual cost, versus the costs budgeted under the model doesn't lead to the EBITDA loss, the loss of EBITDA as of today. But talking about volumes, that's true. The situation of several years has taken place. The volumes in the tariffs were lower and the actual performance was higher, so this gives us additional impulse, positive impulse for EBITDA. We will see what 2020 will be like if the situation is as follows, that the volumes are now declining, but again they will go up later. The situation is good because we're showing an average for a certain 2019 time frame that we take into account volumes actually performed. Of course, envisaged volumes also show, but based on what's happening in 2019. But if it turns out that the volumes rebound, then it is for us a positive piece of information. Of course, it may happen that the volumes will continue to decline still. Let me put it this way, but in distribution we can see very clearly and very fast what is happening in the economy, because it is highly correlated, what is happening to the GDP growth rate and what's happening to the volumes of electricity. You can see it all clearly in the distribution. The GDP growth rate is to a large extent based on consumption now, and probably it will continue to be based on the consumption also in 2020. Also in our case, the volume of electricity distributed in the consumption, talking about households, individual customers, also is going up. You can see it in the manufacturing industry, it's going down. Our idea is this, our hope is that this trend will continue, namely that we will continue seeing in 2020 the consumption, so the individual customers, the retail customers will see continued volume increase, but realistically speaking, it's difficult to assume that the distribution volumes will return to the levels that we saw before. It'll be more of a stabilizing factor, maybe a slight upward adjustment, but will not rebound to the levels that we had before. It's difficult to assume that the factors will have an impact upon the downward trend, downward pressure factor. I'm talking about the large manufacturing industry. Another thing that has an impact upon the distribution volumes, namely the growing number of prosumers, the increasing volume generated on their own. It's due to the price. The price went up, and the installations, many enterprises launched, or individual customers launched their own installations because it became profitable, and this will have an impact upon volumes in the distribution segment. My last question, I wanted to ask about the supply segment, this margin for next year. I understand that for this year you assume 200 million margin loss. So what was your idea of next year in the context of prices? Will they go up? By how much? What customers you can pass it on, and on customers you cannot pass it on? Generally in tariffs A, B, C, and separately G tariff could come on. Are you making money on it or not? What the price we have there and what price we can have next year? This is a difficult question. In the G tariff, the situation is such that it depends on what will be the ultimate shape of the tariff. As of today, we are in the process of filing the tariff applications. We don't know the results of the consequences, the outcome of this process. Of course, definitely, in this segment, supply segment, there'll be a lot of impact coming from the market situation. What will the market be like in 2020? Our assumption is that in 2020, if there is no any specific regulations, because I don't know whether such regulations will surface or not. If they do surface, I don't know what will be the impact. If nothing comes up, we assume a gradual restoration of supply segment's margin. I'm saying slow because it doesn't seem that it's going to be fast. If we took into account the results of the 2019 of the supply segment and deducted the 200 million, because 200 million of the supply segment in 2019 is the dissolving of a provision dating back to end of 2018. If we deducted that 200 million, then we assume a similar level. Of course, if there are no events that could disrupt it, I mean here potential regulations that might simply have an impact upon the EBITDA, then we assume that a similar level should be visible in 2020. However, it's difficult for me to forecast any further because it means that we pass on the entire cost in tariff, G tariff, but it's difficult for me to forecast what will be the final outcome, final general shape of the 2020 market. If you could help me understand at what level G tariff passes on the black energy cost today, if I'm a customer of Tauron, and if you could go a step further, 2021, the capacity market payment, to what extent, how much it led to the invoices. It's also several million PLN. Briefly speaking, if I were to come to today to Tauron Energy Jaworzki, I want to transfer, switch from the current supply, how much will I pay in 2021, and how much I'm paying today, and how much I'll pay in 2021. Definitely, you're selling offers 2 years ahead. We don't have a tariff yet for 2020, even more so 2021. As of today, in the G tariff, we have a level of 2018 in force, so the entire shortfall of the earnings on the G tariff related to the maintaining of the flat price is compensated for us. So we are not passing on the costs. However, we are getting the price difference amount and the financial compensation because of that, due to that. This is the situation as of today. So one may say that taking into account the impact of the Electricity Act, the entire black energy cost is covered in the G tariff. The capacity payment, it will not come into effect starting January 1st, 2020. It is more so Q4 2020. Here, it's difficult for me to predict it. Of course, the increase of the distribution rate may happen because of that, but we still we have our discussion with the Energy Regulatory Office ahead of us on this topic. We are not able yet to indicate the impact because the discussion, in fact, hasn't started yet. For now, we are beginning the talks about the 2020, about January 1st, so it's a bit too early now to forecast what will be the ultimate outcome. Anyhow, in the distribution tariff, this capacity payment may have an important impact. But if you convert it into the percentage, growth percentage, what kind of pressures it is, a few percentage points or more than a dozen percentage points, could be more than a dozen percentage points. But I'm not talking about the beginning of January 2020, but the very impact. Not so much in PLN per megawatt hour. So with black energy, as a matter of fact, we are short 50 or 70 PLN in the G tariff that you're getting today, and additionally there will be another 30, 40 PLN coming from the capacity payments. So this retail G Jaworzki proverbial will have 100 PLN more in 2021. Am I right in my calculations? I know it might not be so in reality, but what's the magnitude of this pressure? No, I think here it's still, I think we need still to talk about the assumptions, what are the details, because it's too early, too premature to speak about that this way. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for receiving our invitation to the earnings conference. I'd like to invite you today already for the full year 2019 conference call that will be held in Q1 next year. Our speakers and experts will still be available for some time. You can talk to them individually, and please contact Investor Relations team in your daily operations in the future. Thank you very much.